Hey, thank you for your service to our country. Yesterday, we saw the Islamic State burn alive the pilot of one of our key allies. In recent months, they've buried women and children alive. They've crucified Christians. They've beheaded Americans and citizens of our allies. The leaders of the Islamic State, the ones who direct and in some cases commit these atrocities, have critical knowledge that we need to stop them. They know where hostages are being held. They have information that would allow us to go after the Islamic State's financial support. They know where other senior leaders are. Sure, they have a lot of intelligence value. If American forces were to capture one of these leaders, say Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi or one of his senior lieutenants, would you recommend that the President send him to Guantanamo Bay so he could be fully interrogated for intelligence value?
I would certainly recommend that he be interrogated for his full intelligence value. It would be a legal determination about where he ended up and so forth. But I think it's important that we get that intelligence value if we do capture people like al-Baghdadi.
Would you recommend that he stay in American custody or that he be transferred to the custody of an ally?
As I sit here right now, I don't know enough to answer that question. That would be a legal determination about his ultimate disposition. But I think the key from a Secretary of Defense's point of view, prospective Secretary of Defense's point of view, would be, let's get that intelligence.
And would you want to see him transferred to the United States mainland, given his Miranda rights, or otherwise put in an Article III federal court?
Again, I don't know enough to know how that, what the ultimate disposition would be appropriate, but I do know that it would be important to interrogate that individual. So whatever the ultimate disposition or legal process was, it should make provision for interrogation.
Thank you. I want to move to the recommendations of the National Defense Panel for the overall military budget. The National Defense Panel, as you know, is a bipartisan and congressionally mandated panel that reviewed the 2014 QDR. That panel stated, quote, Congress and the President should repeal the Budget Control Act immediately and return as soon as possible to at least the funding baseline proposed in Bob Gates's FY 2012 defense budget, end quote. The panel went on to note that while even that amount would likely be inadequate, it represents, quote, the minimum required to reverse course and set the military on a more stable footing. Do you concur with the National Defense Panel's recommendation that Bob Gates's FY 2012 recommendation for the coming fiscal year is the minimum funding baseline needed for the Department of Defense?
The 2012 baseline, just to make sure I understand correctly, is would have removed $500 billion from the defense plan at that time. Sequester would have removed twice that, and so I don't know what the National Defense Panel said, but I would say that if what they were saying was that the sequester level was unacceptable and that the level that Secretary Gates recommended was the one that they supported, I actually supported that too, and continue to think that sequester is a bad idea. And I am familiar with the results of the National Defense Panel and its membership, which was very distinguished.
So to be exact, Secretary Gates's FY12 budget said in FY16 the budget should be $610 billion. At sequester levels, it would be just under $500 billion. I believe the President recommended approximately $535 billion. So this would be another $70 billion plus that the Defense Panel recommends for the coming year.
I see what you're saying. Yes, that's absolutely right. And I think the Defense Department budget has been under pressure now for the last 3 or 4 years in a way that I experienced the effects of firsthand, and they're damaging. And that's one of the reasons why I want to get back on track to getting enough money for defense by getting rid of sequester.
So while $535 billion or some congressional number in that neighborhood might be better than $500 billion, you think $610 billion as recommended by that panel is the minimum necessary to put our military back on the right course?
I wouldn't say it's the minimum necessary to get us back on the right course. We're obviously not going to get that amount of funding, but I can tell you that we can make good use I believe, that is the Department of Defense, can make good use of the funding the President has requested. And I'll say one other thing, if I'm Secretary of Defense, I would like to see more spending on defense. I'm very open about that. I want to get sequester, and I would like to see us spend more on defense. I think that we're having, and this may have been what the NDP was getting at, we're having to accept risk in the execution of our strategy as a result of our funding problems, which I would rather see us not accept.
Senator Cotton.
I'd like to discuss the transfer of 5 Taliban commanders at Guantanamo Bay for Private Bo Bergdahl. Knowing what we now know about the attempted recidivism of one of those Taliban members, as well as the ongoing investigation into Bo Bergdahl's conduct in Afghanistan, do you think that it was a correct decision to go forward with that transfer?
First of all, I don't know the circumstances. I've read the newspaper reports, but I don't have any other information about these individuals. What I do know is this: I wasn't in government at the time the decision was made, but I have read the letters from all the Joint Chiefs of Staff to Senator Levin on this matter, all of whom expressed support for the decision, and I don't want to speak for any of them, but just speaking for myself, it really boiled down to one thing, which you very much from your own distinguished service understand, but just to say it, it is that we have for decades and decades and decades gone back decades and decades and decades in time to battlefields to bring home our fallen. And so it is a sacred duty to bring back our fallen. That was the motivation that the chiefs cited as motivating their support for the Bergdahl decision. It obviously was a difficult decision to make because of the 5 people that you now cite. But they supported the decision, and based on what I know about the circumstances as they were known at the time, I would have supported the decision as well.
Well, I opposed it then, and I would oppose it now. And we didn't leave Bo Bergdahl behind. The thousands of soldiers who went after him, trying to find him, who faced enemy fire, trying to locate him, we're not leaving him behind. You're right that they tell every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine that they won't leave us behind. That doesn't mean they'll trade 5 stone-cold Taliban killers for us. When this transfer happened, Congress was not notified as required by the law. Can you assure us that in the future Congress will always receive advance notification as required by law for future releases of Guantanamo prisoners?
I can assure you we will always abide by the law. Absolutely, sir.
There have been media reports, most recently from Secretary Hagel himself, that he received White House pressure to sign off on the certification that Guantanamo detainees could be released. There have been reports that Leon Panetta even declined to release these 5 specific Taliban members at Guantanamo Bay. Can you talk to us about how you might resist such pressure if you receive it from the White House when it comes to Guantanamo Bay releases?
I sure can. I'm going to call it straight. I have an obligation under the law with respect to the risk associated with transfers of detainees, and I intend to discharge that responsibility in a very straight-up way.
Shifting to Bo Bergdahl, my understanding is the investigation is still ongoing into his conduct in Afghanistan. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding from the newspapers, but I don't have any inside information.
If confirmed, can you assure us that that investigation will proceed without unlawful command influence at any level?
Absolutely.
I'd like to shift briefly to Russia and Ukraine and implications for the Baltic states. Right now there's fighting going on in Ukraine. Much of it is over the Minsk line, where the so-called Minsk line, where the forces were supposed to be separated since September. One technique that Russia used in Ukraine, then they used in Crimea, then they used in eastern Ukraine, is the so-called Little Green Men. Mm-hmm. By most reports, these are Russian special operations forces who are operating in advance in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. If Russia has uniformed soldiers operating on foreign territory without insignia, would that be a violation of the Geneva Conventions?
What it is, I just don't know the international legal answer to to the question you're posing, Senator. What I do know is that's what they've been doing, and I don't know. I think the little green men are part of the big lie, the big Putin lie, where he is clearly violating the sovereignty of a neighboring country, and then pretending it isn't him and pretending it isn't Russia. And as far as I understand, it very clearly is Russia. So it seems to me that's very important. I don't know the legal part of it, but the common sense answer is he's violated Ukrainian sovereignty.
I believe there's a strong case that it would violate the Geneva Conventions to have soldiers operating without insignia. And since you said earlier that you would support putting NATO forces in Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, I would say I support that as well, especially recon forces who might be on the lookout for little green men. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Senator